Thank you, Simon. It's good to be here today. So just by way of introduction, I'm a partner and a founder of a firm called Innova Health Partners, which is a private equity firm which invests in medical technology. We've been managing over 900 million US dollars in assets under management. Our returns over the last decade is a 3.7 times capital invested. In our parlance, in our world at Innova Health Partners, we look at innovations from a standpoint of medical devices, that is mechanically engineered surgical implants and proceduralization technologies. So Avantika, we'd love to hear about what you do and your perspective and where the two maybe merge.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, John. Thank you, Simon. Hi, all foreign members. It's lovely to be a part of this group. I've had the luxury, courtesy Simon and courtesy my husband Anish to be involved with the group in different shapes and forms. So excited to be here in conversation with John. A little bit about my background. Currently, I'm a partner and managing director at a very unique venture group called Plum Alley. We have a thesis-driven investment towards sector and stage. We focus on STEM, deep tech and frontier healthcare companies. So, you know, healthcare, some of the stuff that John and I see kind of overlap, but with a gender mandate. And so we ensure that there's at least one female founder, co-founder at the founding team level. We've deployed in the last 4 years, 32 million. We're raising our first fund of 50 million and really excited to see all that accumulated capital come together to support both technology and what we refer to as frontier healthcare companies merging. And, you know, one of the things, John or Simon, I think you mentioned, you know, what are we seeing as part of this discussion? What are we seeing in healthcare? And, you know, before coming to this conversation, John, Simon, and I kind of spoke last month about how do we envision healthcare? What are the innovations that we're seeing? You know, innovations is kind of interesting because yes, we can define it by products and the cool stuff that John's seeing on the medical device side. We're investors in CRISPR. I've been involved in the CRISPR platform post Cas9, you know, sort of taking on the V2 or the second version of the good stuff to come out of CRISPR, which is a huge milestone in, I think, humanity and in where healthcare is going. Dr. Jennifer Doudna won the Nobel Prize in chemistry. But one of the thoughts I had is we refer to our system or this discussion called healthcare, except it's not healthcare. And we, John and myself and others, some of you here are investors in healthcare. And unfortunately, what's happened historically is that we have invested a lot of money in a system that doesn't support healthcare. It supports the unhealthcare. And what I mean by that is if you look at our payer system, the companies, you know, that have been funded, pharmaceutical companies, everyone's in the business to support the unhealthy. So, you know, what one sort of thought I had coming into discussion is why do we even call it healthcare when it's not? It's really supporting the unhealthy. And true healthcare is really about preventative medicine. It's about using technology, which people thought was separate as an industry from healthcare, but it's really not. It's about using innovation, AI, your own data, you know, for patients, they have to advocate for themselves. You know, why do we rinse and repeat all the time? John, you're in the business of medtech. You know, you see a lot of the rinse and repeat happening. Why can't we solve for this problem where it begins? You know, would love to hear your lens on it, you know, at a 60,000 foot perspective.
It's a wonderful riff. My closest friend is the chief of functional neurosurgery at Mount Sinai Hospital, and he calls healthcare Sickcare because what are we doing? You know, with all these pharmaceuticals is drugging chronic diseases and not really investing in the world of preventative healthcare, your word healthcare. So there is an emergent trend in the domain of preventative care that I find quite fascinating, which is, if you can believe this, behavioral modification. A very good example of that is a company, we're not invested in this company, it is called Virta, V-I-R-T-A Health, Its founder is a great entrepreneur named Sami Inkanen. What are they doing? It is an online type 2 diabetes clinic that through apps, through AI, is modifying people's behavior to actually reverse type 2 diabetes, instead as an alternate to drugging, amputation, wound care. And their results are absolutely stunning. So that could be kind of a hint at what you're talking about, which is if we can modify behaviors for preventative care, what other chronic diseases does this apply to? Could be a very big trend.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you mentioned something very critical, which is neuromodulation, right?
Yes.
Prevention is one aspect, that's consumer behavior. You use the word apps. The hairs on my back stand up. Hopefully they're none, but they stand up because, you know, that's very consumer centric, right? And as healthcare investors, we like to believe that we're a little bit serious and a little bit differentiated on the science element of it. But frankly, my learning through COVID has been that we've really got to embrace all of it. We've got to embrace the food aspect of it. Anish recently sent an article around about a huge investment, $90 million that was made towards CRISPR, not in healthcare, but food tech. So one of the companies that we're invested in, Mammoth Biosciences, which Dr. Jennifer Doudna won the Nobel Prize of and is a scientific co-founder, you know, they have their vision and mission in life is to go beyond healthcare, to disrupt food tech, to disrupt security of food. You know, you think about nations where if the wheat that entire nation depends on gets some bug in it, you literally at the risk of wiping out subpopulations, right? So CRISPR as a innovative element. And for those of you who are wondering what CRISPR is, it's CRISPR. It's our genetic platform. And a lot of innovation has occurred where one can modify the genetic platform for both therapeutic purposes, but also diagnostic purposes, which is the preventative element of it. And it's applicable not just for our body, but the food we eat, the plants. And so when you look at these innovative platforms, they go beyond what we consider traditional healthcare, right? So it's the food we eat, it's how we live, the preventative element of it, the consumption of information, the lifestyle, but then the important work of fixing what's not working, which is where John comes in with medical devices, where I come in, you know, as an investor of really taking a lens, what's happening today, what's likely to happen 5 and 10 years from now, and making those bets almost like bleeding edge into leading edge, into bettering our life and humanity, you know, at the risk of being a little bit philosophical over the next 5 years. And one of the things, John, you mentioned this concept of prevention versus neuromodulation. Now, neuromodulation, there's a lot of work happening there. Fairly new age, you know, some of it, I think over the last couple of years, we've digested it with a great sense of appreciation, but helps with pain management, opioid addiction, you know, cancer patients, of course, the pain aspect of it, you know, kind of the intersection of medical science, technology, and human mindset of philosophy coming together. I mean, who would have thought, right? Not in Western medicine would we have thought that philosophy and mindset played a critical part in healthcare. So a great company I would mention is Sana Health, SANAHEALTH. They use neuromodulation. They've got a device that you put over your eyes. For me, the biggest moment was that it actually made me sleep better because it helped with the neuromodulation element of it. Taking that towards a moonshot, another company that we're actually quite interested in process is Open Water. Fascinating woman, Dr. Mary Lou Jepsen, GEPSEN. She's the force behind Elon Musk's idea about drilling a hole in your brain, Neuralink, the company. She's the force behind Apple, Facebook, getting inside the minds, you know, bringing in technology from a lens perspective to now doing her own company that's disrupting diagnostics with our devices. And then her moonshot is the idea of a Google Cap, where you can literally see what's happening in your brain without any intervention, physical intervention, to then predict out what is the likelihood of you getting early onset of Alzheimer's, what is the likelihood of Parkinson's, how is your genome makeup supportive, where you live, what you do, what you're exposed to. Is Facebook good for you or not? Like, the concept of the application of this idea of a non-visible Google Cap through neuromodulation and other scientific methods is really fascinating. And not without risk. None of this is without risk, right, John? I mean, even Chris.
Avantika, I absolutely concur with you. The brain, if we want to call it just the brain as a global question, is one of the biggest areas in medicine, both from a research standpoint, from a commercialization standpoint. And the term that you were using earlier, for those of you who are unfamiliar, neuromodulation is either the electrical or the magnetic stimulation of neurons to produce a desired effect. So that could include what is effectively a pacemaker, like a heart pacemaker, except it is implanted into the brain to modify electrical signals that are pathological and to normalize the brain into a state that, for example, would prevent the symptoms of Parkinson's, the tremors, from manifesting. So if we take that and extend that, there are applications in neuromodulation from a physical state such as Parkinson's to mental states such as addiction, depression, and so forth. As that field develops, it is highly disintermediative to pharmaceuticals. Would you agree with that, Avantika?
Absolutely. I think pharma is getting a run for its money, finally. Look, we didn't talk about our extended background, but I spent a good 2.5 decades, a good portion of it in pharma and biotech. Was part of an early team that went public with a first drug to treat blindness caused by aging and diabetes, AMD and DME. And for those that live long enough, you're going to get AMD, different versions of it, dry leading to wet, yet there was no solution towards it. And so I think that in my day of sitting on the other side of the table and having exposure to how the drug development process works and what keeps pharmaceutical companies profitable and motivated is not aligned with solving for the big problems of the world, including our health. And we need them. Heck, I need them, because if they don't exist, as investors, we're not going to get our returns. But I think for the first time, pharmaceutical companies are getting a run for their money to rethink how they have to also not replace, but also think about other areas beyond drug therapy, beyond the blue pill or beyond the next, big immunotherapy or targeted therapy for cancer. They have to, and they have begun thinking about other therapeutic areas also that were considered orphan before, such as the one that I mentioned in ophthalmology that I had a playing hand in for a few years, to now thinking about, okay, drug therapy plays a part, and there's a spectrum. How do we, as the big pharma company, also play a good part in the spectrum, whether it's content, building communities, supporting nonprofit, to also investing in innovative platforms and discovery, spending dollars and budgets on discovery in different areas.
That is a huge topic. Basic research. Basic research is something that we absolutely need to invest in. And to define that, it's, we should be researching protein folding. We should be researching the basics of cellular machinery. So an example is, of course, the coronavirus and the vaccines. The reason why Moderna and BioNTech were able to come up with vaccines is because they come from the basic research community and they understand RNA folding very well, and we're able to utilize these basic concepts in biology and translate that into a vaccine. Time and time again, I'm formerly a director of the Whitehead Institute at MIT, also the McGovern Institute of Brain Research, also at MIT. Both do basic research, and the dividends, the return on investment to society, companies really can only do so much basic research. We need governments such as the NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health in the United States, to fund these initiatives that end up leapfrogging very often directed research. We're going to cure cancer over here. That's directed research. Well, we're going to study stem cell propagation over here. That's basic research. Sometimes those discoveries, boom, leapfrog over into cancer research.
So John and Avantika, thank you so much. I'm going to jump in here. So many interesting things to think about there, not least the Google shot. I hadn't thought about that, but we have 3 questions in so far. So very quickly, in fact, I always like to bring the forum voices in. So Thomas Brown, I'm going to unmute you now. And in fact, I see you're unmuted. Could you come forth with your question, please, Thomas?
Sure. My question is sort of a macroeconomic question. When we talk about healthcare versus sick care, I think part of the problems, perhaps the fundamental problem, is that people won't pay for prevention. And I don't limit this just to healthcare. I could talk about my own business where and the premise is, if you have cancer, literally or metaphorically, some problem, and I can cut it out of you, you'll pay me anything I want to do so and be glad that you did if I do it successfully. But if I tell you, I know cancer, I can prevent it, here's what you must do, it's much lower cost, people won't pay for that. And so the commercial incentives are wrong in terms of how we get people to be in the marketplace of selling prevention. And I'm interested in your thoughts on how we address that challenge.
It may be not necessarily macroeconomic. Think of microeconomics, behavioral economics. Cass Sunstein in their famous book, Nudging Behavior. I'll go back to this company, Virta Health, which is trying to incentivize people to, actually there's a company called Omada, which is even more on the preventative spectrum than Virta. And it's basically trying to get people not to eat so much chocolate cake. And guess what? It turns out to be really hard not to get people to eat chocolate cake, because you don't know that the penalty for that over a lifetime of excess sugar is diabetes. It's very, very hard to modulate. And unfortunately, that creates 2 markets in my mind. One is the preventative healthcare for people who are able to see through the benefits of preventative care. But unfortunately, we've created a $900 million firm around people not being able to modulate their behavior, unfortunately. And the end result is you have companies such as Dexcom, which does continuous glucose monitoring, right, for people who didn't modulate their behavior. And that market is going to stay.
Yeah, I think I'd like to add to it. So definitely, Thomas, thanks for your question. There are 2 parts to it, as John referred. The first part is behavioral modification, right? Preventative behavioral modification. None of us, I think you have to be a yogi to be able to do that, right? We know what's good for us. We know what's bad for us, yet we don't do the things all the time that's good for us to take us down that path, right? So one aspect is the behavioral element of it. I think we're seeing some really cool techie stuff that's coming down. It's still a bit of a moonshot that actually does modify behavior overnight, neuromodulation being one of them. But I think there's a second bucket. And the second bucket, I believe we do have control of. I think it is right aligned to who's paying for it, who's making the money, and who's benefiting. in terms of the three constituents. And that second bucket I would call is knowledge-driven information, right? And that's where AI, natural language processing, predictability comes in. And so your scenario, Thomas, of saying, hey, you've got cancer, I can cut it out, versus don't do these 10 things for 20 years in your life to not get cancer. There's another bucket there. And that bucket, the narrative to that bucket is, look, we've just taken your saliva collection, and we have, through our knowledge of AI and predictive data and computational chemistry and computational biology, all fancy words, but real applications in this case, are telling you that in 10 years, you will be at a 20% risk of having a blockage in your heart. In the next 2 years, you will be at risk of having cancer cells show up in this part of your body, right? Very specific, very driven by data and information. I call it knowledge, not necessarily data, but it's knowledge-driven information. And so the so what in that knowledge is it allows you as the actor and the benefitter to say, oh my God, 2 years, I really don't want to see, this cancer cell initiating in my body in the next 2 years. So what am I going to do? In 5 years, whoa, I'm at a 50% or higher risk of a heart issue, a pulmonary embolism, or whatever that might be. What can I do to take it today? So the gap between the two scenarios is that the first one of prevention is too wide, it's too generic, and it doesn't allow the so what for you as an individual to occur. I think the beauty of where we sit today and what excites me in my job every day is that we're taking these vast amounts of information and creating the so what, so that the prevention element happens. And then the payer, which is your insurance company, the behavior change is happening. They're forced into it now. All of them, with the exception of, I think, one big payer who's also changing, is incentivizing healthcare and their lives, as they call it, to have prevention. Very, very simple example. They pay for 6 therapy sessions. They pay for mental health. They pay for, a portion of your gym. Those are very, very minor level of behavioral changes for a very large industry of health insurance, but it's there. Where they're moving to now is that they're actually investing in these innovative companies that we invest in, believe it or not. They're coming in as the Series B investor to say, hey, we really need to change our game, because guess what? After the baby boomers are, the next subpopulation that's going to be paying their bills is beyond the baby boomers. And it's the millennials, and it's the Gen Zs, and it's the alphas, whatever they're soon to be called. And we have to think like them and what they do and how they behave. And if they're on apps and they believe in content over injecting themselves, we've got to go there. So it's happening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, both. Thomas, forgive me for not giving you right to reply there, but I need to move on swiftly from one sunshine in Texas to another in Soto Grande. Where is Patrick? Patrick Asia, can you ask your question, please?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, listen, thank you very much, John and Avantika. I mean, thank you very much indeed for highlighting neuromodulation. I'm a life science investor. I've been in the business for 25 years, and I funded an incubator accelerator at the University of Vienna, where we fund a lot of companies working on the areas you're talking about. 70% of what we do is involved in what you refer to as the brain, so central nervous system. But I'm really delighted you mentioned neuromodulation. I'm a director of 2 neuromodulation companies, one in Switzerland, one in the US. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting, Avantika, you mentioned that these types of devices are relatively new, and they are innovative, but they're not so much new. That it's simply because the drug and pharma industry has had very little incentive to provide consumers with a device that takes away the need to take a drug. And so neuromodulation has been around for a long time, but it's been very much a fringe area. It's coming into the forefront now, and Elon Musk certainly makes it very public. People argue about the validity of some of his claims. We do place devices into the brain for treating Parkinson's disease, essential tremor. We also do epilepsy, and we have a CE mark. This has been proven and gone through clinical studies and is now a common device, but also for blood pressure. Again, a very, very interesting one. A lot of people with a heart condition suffer from blood pressure issues. This can now be controlled with an actual neuromodulation device. So thanks for highlighting that. It's definitely the future of some of how the medical device industry is going. And also you talked a little bit on the oncology and cancer, and you mentioned precision medicine. And that's another area that's very, very interesting to us. We believe the ability with the amount of data we have for a doctor or a surgeon to not just prescribe you a drug to treat your cancer, but to actually prescribe the correct drug for you. And you're very different from the person next door. And not everybody who is between 45 and 50 needs the same cancer drug. Cancer drugs are quite generic. So having precision medicine as a way of going forward is certainly very, very interesting. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for highlighting those two areas. It's definitely the future for life sciences. And the more people we can get to invest in these areas, the better. It's a win-win for the industry and for the patients.
Yeah, and I will say, your point, Patrick, in addition to highlighting some of the areas that you've been working on for a long period of time, is a relevant one. Look, the mRNA vaccine didn't just happen overnight. In fact, the first targeted therapeutic drug in the US was a deal being done by ImClone and BMS. And I was a commercial lead on that deal when I was at Bristol Myers Squibb. And we thought we had found the holy grail of cancer, to Patrick's point, because we thought it was targeted therapy, what we referred to as precision medicine back then, right? Kill the bad cells, leave the good cells. Well, except fast forward, it doesn't quite happen that way, right? Like there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of the precisionness of how targeted therapy works. But ImClone got famous for all the wrong reasons because of insider trading. That's when Martha Stewart went behind bars, and the Waxel brothers, had to pay their dues. But they were the first mRNA targeted molecule towards treating certain types of cancer. And so, this research has been going on for over 2 decades, which, to some of the points mentioned earlier, somebody's got to help keep that research interest up across all areas, because you never see the payout today. The payout comes 20, 40, 50 years from now. Fortunately, because of technology and some of the elements that Patrick referred to as this concept of computational biology and computational chemistry, which then comes into precision medicine, which really, at the end of the day, the biggest benefit of what computational information and data does is that it compresses 10 years into a year, right? So we are now benefiting from investments into research in our lifetime rather than beyond our lifetime.
John,
if I could just chime in. Yes, go ahead, Simon.
No, I'm just going to say we're now running over. There are a couple of further questions which I have from Marta and Monica, which with your permission, Marta and Monica, I will put to Avantika and John separately after this call. But John, did you want to respond to what Patrick and Avantika were saying?
Very briefly, both great. I mean, Patrick, I'm so glad you raised the topic, because the question is the disintermediative effect of devices versus pharma, and only if the picture were that simple. You could say it's a simple case. Knee replacement disintermediates opioids. Why? Knee replacement stops pain. Simple. The brain is way more complex. And yes, arguably neuromodulation for the brain for depression could disintermediate pharma, but there's so much more going on. There's also integrative, where devices and drugs merge. In cases of targeted cancer therapeutics, a pressure delivery system for, say, pancreatic cancer that targets the chemo only to the organ by delivering the compound in a high pressure capacity to the tumor, which can't receive the chemo normally under normal blood pressure conditions also suggests that you can have kind of a merger of pharma and med devices. The picture is more complex, and it really boils down to the specific indications and modalities.
So thank you both very much indeed. I mean, it's such a privilege to be at the helm of Forum, where these conversations that we're putting together, the 20 minutes and the 10 minutes, there are so many interesting brains across so many different sectors. And this was really, really interesting. I've absolutely got to ask you back in September or October, please, to continue the conversation. My apologies to Martha and Monica. I'm so sorry. But I think, you know, keeping it short and sharp is the way for Forum. And thank you so much again. I would remind those of you who are in London or Europe that on Thursday, we have a 9 o'clock and 10 a.m. CET talk with Robert Cohen on the passion economy, which I know will be very, very interesting. Many of you will remember Robert spoken both in London and Singapore on Bitcoin, and he will talk to us on the passion economy. And those of you who are in New York and on the West Coast, you'll shortly be receiving, if you haven't already, an invitation to a jazz evening on Saturday, the 27th. And John, I know there's no one who knows more about jazz than you. So we'll definitely expect you to be there. For the moment, thank you very, very much, everybody. And if you have further questions or want to be put in touch with John or Avantika, then just be in touch and I'll make that happen. Or you could do it through the Forum app. Okay, thank you so much for now. Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Simon, for hosting us. Take care, everybody.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thanks, Avantika. Thank you.